Well, hello everyone. Good morning. So excited to be here with you all today. Thanks for joining us. We are here live with New York Times bestselling author Jon Acuff. Super excited to ask him some questions and get some insight. If y'all have any questions that you would like me to ask him, please feel free to drop them in the comments. And without further ado, oh, thanks for joining, Laura. All right, Jon. So super excited to have you here. Thanks for talking to us. Your latest book, Finish, Give Yourself the Gift of Done, just released last week. So I have a couple questions for
Great.
you. Why is this message important to you? And what is it about you that makes you want to see other people finish their goals?
It's important because the only place they hand out medals is at the finish line. Like, you don't get a medal in the middle. It's important because when you do a goal, it's never just a goal. A goal is a promise, and it's a promise you make to yourself. And when you don't keep the goal, you break the promise, and you essentially lie to the person you spend the most time with, which is yourself. And goals you don't finish don't disappear. They become ghosts that haunt you. And there's this residue and this weight. And so if you've told yourself for 5 years, I'm going to write a book someday, every time you pass a bookstore, there's this little pinch of shame. And so finishing something, not only is it really fun, but it releases you to do a bunch of other things.
Very cool. So the tagline is giving yourself the gift of done. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means? Why is being done a gift?
Well, I mean, a big part of it, we hired a researcher. We commissioned a research report from a university and studied nearly 900 people for 6 months so that we could say, okay, if you want to finish, these are the practical, real steps you take. And it's enjoyable. And there's a reason, you'll see small businesses that'll frame their first dollar because they crossed that finish line. So there's great joy in actually completing the race.
Very cool. Love it. So in the intro of your book, you call your garage, it's hysterical, the mausoleum of almost, and you list a bunch of your items like your snowboard and fishing poles, and then you talk about your 19 nearly finished chapsticks, which, I mean, I can relate to
I have
with
3 with
lipstick.
me right now.
Really? And are they like down to the nub, or are they still
No,
like
they're
working?
pretty new. Somebody gave them to me like when I was traveling. One of them is a rose, and it is not good.
Aw, man. Well, so you say your financial advisor probably goes bananas over your lip hydration budget.
Sure.
Hysterical. But it's also kind of sad when you stop and think about it. Is starting and failing to finish, is it a cultural thing? Do you think it's a universal thing? And why does it happen to us as humans, and how do we knock it off?
I know it's definitely an American thing. Part of it is our motivational speak celebrates the beginning and ignores the hard work in the middle. So we say things like, well begun is half done, or the hardest part of any journey is the first step, or the finish line doesn't matter, just the courage to start. But if you unpack those, well begun is half done. If a surgeon said to you, once I make the first incision, I'm half done, you'd go, where did you go to medical school? That can't be true.
Right.
The hardest part of any journey is the first step. Are you kidding me? The middle is the worst part. We have launch parties for the beginning. There's no such thing as a middle party. So the middle, so I think culturally, it's exciting, it's shiny, it's colorful to say, like, you just got to be brave enough to start. But if somebody was running a marathon and I came up in the middle and said, don't worry about the finish line, you had the courage to start, they'd be like, you give terrible advice. So I think culturally we love to celebrate the beginning and ignore all the work that comes next.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely agree. And unless you're running a half marathon, I mean...
Yeah, you have a long way to go.
It's so true. So true. So in your book, you talk a lot about perfectionism getting in the way of our goals, but I think a lot of us struggle with even really knowing what perfectionism is, and many of us who have goals are probably like, I'm not a perfectionist. I don't have to have things done perfectly, but they have sort of an altered perception of what perfectionism is. Can you explain a little bit of what perfectionism means and how to identify it in our lives and in our work?
Sure. I mean, I think a good sign of perfectionism is you won't start something unless you know you can finish it to a high standard. So, like cleaning your room. You won't clean your room unless you know you can label everything perfectly. Or you won't, your phone tells you you're almost running out of storage. And you won't delete things unless you can go through 10,000 photos and place them in folders and label them. And so that's a big part of perfectionism, is the belief that it's either perfect or it's not started at all. You can't get a B. Like, B's don't count, C's don't count. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the myth is that it's a positive character trait, and it's not. So another sign you're a perfectionist is if you have a lot of projects that were almost launched. So they got right up to the edge, and then you pull back, right up to the edge, and then you pull back. So I think, your comfort to handle a B plus is an indication that you're doing well with beating perfectionism. Your inability, your desire to take a 0 instead of a B plus is a sign you're not there yet.
Interesting. Okay. So with kind of the grade scale mentality, that starts with us at like a really young age, 4 or 5, or maybe even preschool age, we're earning grades. So how do we work to break that cycle, and how do we push back on perfectionism in our lives since it starts so young?
Well, I think it starts with small ways. You don't have to, it'd be crazy to apply principles to a big, massive goal that you've always wanted to do right out of the gate. So it might be that you say, I'm going to read 3 books this month, and you only finish 2, and that's okay, because it was just your goal. It's so funny. I'm trying to read a bunch of books right now, and I posted a graphic novel on Instagram that I read, and somebody said, graphic novels don't count. And I wanted to say, according to who? According to what? Who is judging my personal reading goal? Like,
Right.
I make the rules. So a sign that you're struggling with perfectionism is you have this secret jury of people. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a teacher who said something to you a long time ago that you're still trying to live up to. So part of practicing a way to break perfectionism is finding small goals you can do that don't cost you a ton emotionally, that aren't time consuming, but you can say, it wasn't perfect and I didn't die. Like the world didn't fall apart. I can probably do a little bigger one next time.
I like that. You're not going to die if you don't do
Probably
it perfectly.
not. Most times you won't.
Unless you're a surgeon, and then
or if you're but if you're in NASA, fine. This is different for you.
Yeah.
But the percent of my audience that's in NASA is pretty slim.
So you've finished a bunch of books, and you're a blogger, and your tweets are hilarious, but how do you know when something that you're working on is finished? How do you know when to step back and when your job is completed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways. Like, one, you always have a friend that will hold you accountable. There's actually an author named Derek Sievers talks about this study. If you tell people your goal the wrong way, you won't do it. So if I tell you I'm going to run a marathon, you pre-congratulate me. You go, that's so brave of you. I couldn't do that. Good for you. And my body releases dopamine, and I feel good enough that I don't actually run. Like I haven't run a mile. You're already going, good for you, John. What I have to do the right way is to say, will you please ask me every week if I ran 3 times? So part of it is having an accountability partner that says, hey, I'm just checking in. Did you finish this thing you were going to finish? Having a natural deadline. When I write a book, I have deadlines. There's a difference between writing and writing a book. Writing is like I can just go and it's feelings and it's just there's no deadline. Writing a book has deadlines and expectations. So a big part of actually finishing is having a deadline and then figuring out what are the consequences if you don't meet it. If there aren't consequences, the deadline is useless.
Very good. Super insightful. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Would you
sure.
tell our viewers where they can find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, so the book's available everywhere. You can go to acuff.me to find me, which is acuff.me. And then I'm Jon Acuff, JONACUFF on Twitter and Instagram and most social platforms.
Very good. Thank you so much for your
Sure.
Everyone, we are just moments away from our executive leadership series where Jon will be speaking and giving some more insight. So thank you so much for watching with us, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your Thursdays.